The high desert wind of Wyoming tasted the same. That, at least, had not changed in 30 years. It still carried the same bite of alkali dust, the same dry scent of sagebrush and distant, cold stone. Annabeth Coulter pulled the mule to a halt at the crest of the ridge overlooking Elkhorn Springs. She was 52 years old, but the lines on her face had been carved by weather and grief. Not time alone. They felt deeper than her years. She looked down at the town, a place she had last seen as a girl of 22. It had been a raw outpost then. Now, in 1893, it was just a bigger, more settled scar on the landscape. She clucked to the mule, and the tired cart creaked down the slope. Her husband, Joseph, was buried 3 states east, in soil that was too soft and too dark. Her son, Thomas, was a man grown and a stranger, lost to the cities and his own anger. Annabeth had nothing left back there. She had come home, not for comfort, but for closure. She had come back to the one place that had hurt her more than any other, to see its bones and perhaps, finally, lay her own ghosts to rest. She drove the cart down the main street. New storefronts stood where there had been tents. Glass windows gleamed where oiled paper had once been. Men in hats tipped them, not in recognition, but in the automatic courtesy given to a lone, aging woman who looked like she had seen too much road. She was a ghost already, and she knew it. At the mercantile, she bought flour, coffee, beans, and a small block of salt. She paid in coin, her hands steady. The proprietor, a man with a soft belly and slicked-down hair, counted the change without meeting her eyes. He saw a traveler, not a prodigal. "Passing through?" he asked, his voice oily with false politeness.
"Something like that,"
Annabeth said. Her voice was rough from disuse. She loaded her supplies and guided the mule out of the noise and smell of the town. She took the Old North Trail, the one that led up into the high benches. The land opened up, vast and unforgiving. The wind picked up, a steady, sharp whine that seemed to come from the core of the mountains. She remembered every twist in the trail, every dry arroyo, every stand of wind-racked pine. She had ridden this path 1,000 times as a girl, her hair loose, her legs strong on the sides of a fast pony. Now, she was hunched on the hard seat of a cart, pulled by a mule that was as weary as she was. The sun was tilting toward the west, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and bruised purple. When she reached the final rise, she stopped the mule. Her breath caught. The homestead was supposed to be gone. She had expected ashes, or perhaps a few crumbling foundation stones. Her brother, Silas, would have let it rot. But the ranch house was standing. It was wrong. It was horribly, fundamentally wrong. The original Coulter house had been built of thick log and river stone, low to the ground, braced for the wind. This was that house, but it had been added to. Strange. Lean-to structures clung to its sides like barnacles. A long, low building, almost like a barracks, stretched out from where the smokehouse used to be. A second story, cobbled together from different kinds of timber, had been added to the main house, looking clumsy and precarious. Smoke did not rise from one chimney. It rose from 3. Annabeth sat on the cart, her hands gripping the reins. A cold, sharp anger, colder than the wind, moved through her veins. This was not ruin. This was violation. She urged the mule forward, down into the yard she had once played in. The place was tidy, too tidy. There were neat stacks of firewood, a large, well-tended vegetable garden covered in frost cloth, and several water barrels lined up against the new building. Before her foot could even touch the ground, a voice sliced through the wind. "That's far enough. Traveler." Annabeth froze. She looked toward the porch. A young woman stood there, leveling a Winchester rifle at her chest. She was young, perhaps 20, with sharp eyes and hair braided tight. She wore men's trousers and a heavy wool coat. She did not look nervous. She looked protective. Annabeth slowly lowered herself from the cart, keeping her hands visible.
I'm not a traveler,
Annabeth said, her voice carrying easily on the wind. You're on private land. State your business or turn that cart around. The young woman's finger was steady on the trigger guard. A knot of something thick and painful lodged in Annabeth's throat. She had faced down drought, cholera, and the death of her own child. She would not be turned away from her own home by a girl with a rifle. This is the Coulter homestead, Annabeth stated. It was not a question. The young woman's eyes narrowed. Ain't no Coulters here. Hasn't been for a long time. Now, I'm asking you polite. Leave. I am Annabeth Coulter. The name fell from her lips and seemed to die in the dust. It felt like a stone. 30 years. She had not spoken that name in this place for 30 years. The young woman's face shifted from suspicion to confusion, then hardened again. You're lying. The Coulters are dead or gone. This is our land.
This is my father's land,
Annabeth said, her voice dropping low.
My land, and I'd thank you to lower that rifle.
Ruth, that's enough. The voice came from the door of the main house. It was a man's voice, quiet but heavy. A man stepped out onto the porch, moving between Annabeth and the young woman called Ruth. He was tall and lean as a fence post, but he moved with a stillness that spoke of strength. He might have been 40, or he might have been 60. The high desert sun had weathered him deep, carving lines around his eyes and mouth. He wore a simple canvas coat, and his dark hair was long, tied back with a leather thong. He looked at Annabeth, not with hostility, but with a deep, penetrating curiosity. His eyes were the color of slate.
She says she's a Coulter,
Ruth said, her rifle still half raised.
Says it's her land.
The man, Levi Boone, never took his eyes off Annabeth. He saw the mule cart, the paltry supplies, the iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the exhaustion that was so deep it looked like part of her bones. He saw the set of her jaw. He nodded slowly. I see. He stepped off the porch. He did not look armed, but Annabeth knew men like him were never truly unarmed. He stopped a few yards from her. The wind's sharp, he said. His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the brewing storm in the yard. You look frozen. We have hot tea inside. Annabeth stared at him. He was offering her tea, in her own home. The absurdity of it was a slap. Who are you? She demanded. My name is Levi Boone. These are my people. Your people, Annabeth repeated, the words tasting like poison. In my house. Levi's expression did not change. There was no apology in his eyes, but no malice either. Only a profound, weary calm. When we came here 10 years ago, this place was empty. The roof was gone. The walls were falling in. It was lawless land. Ma'am, we built it back. We made it a home.
You made it a sty,
Annabeth said, gesturing to the strange additions. This is Coulter land. I have the deed. I'm sure you do, Levi said, still calm. But a piece of paper don't keep the snow out. We've bled into this dirt. We've buried our own here. A cold fury, the kind she had not felt since she was a young woman, rose in Annabeth. She wanted to scream. She wanted to find the girl she used to be, the one who would have pulled this man off the porch and beaten him with her bare hands. But that girl was gone.
I am not leaving,
Annabeth said. Her voice was flat, final. Levi Boone held her gaze. He seemed to be measuring her, weighing her spirit. He saw the unbroken line of her spine.
I didn't ask you to,
he said quietly. But you won't be sleeping in the house tonight. Not like this. Ruth, lower the rifle. Go fetch some blankets. The girl, Ruth, looked outraged.
Levi, she's a stranger. She's claiming.
I heard what she's claiming.
And I see what she is. She's a woman alone. And it's getting dark.
Go on. Ruth snapped her mouth shut, shot Annabeth a look of pure venom, and stalked back inside the longhouse.
I don't want your blankets,
Annabeth said. You'll take them, Levi replied. Not as a command, but as a fact. Or you'll freeze. The nights here drop fast. He turned and walked back inside, leaving her alone in the yard as the last light of the sun vanished behind the peaks, plunging the world into a deep, cold blue. Annabeth stood trembling, not from cold, but from a rage so profound it choked her. She would not be bullied, and she would not accept their charity. She unhitched the mule, tied its lead to the cartwheel, and pulled her own bedroll from the back. She did not go toward the house. She walked past it, toward the rise where the old barn had been. It was gone, just as she'd known it would be. All that remained were the foundation stones, a dark, rectangular scar on the earth. This was the barn her father had raised. This was the barn where she had hidden from her brother. This was the barn where her life had ended. She made her camp there, in the ruin of her past. She spread her bedroll within the shelter of the low, broken stone walls. It offered little protection from the wind, which howled over the ridge like a mourning woman. She built a small fire from sagebrush twigs and broken bits of old, dry wood she found nearby. It was a pitiful thing, spitting more smoke than heat. She sat with her back against the cold stones and pulled her coat tight. The mule stamped nervously nearby, and then, as the first stars pricked the black sky, the coyotes began to sing. Their howls echoed from the bluffs, a lonely, wild sound that wrapped around her. This was the closure she had come for. The cold, the stones, the howling emptiness. She had expected to find this. She had wanted to find this. The people in her house were the part she could not understand. She closed her eyes, and the wind carried her back. 30 years, 1,863. She wasn't 52, she was 22, and she was made of fire and vinegar. The barn had been new then, smelling of fresh-cut pine and horses. Her father was 2 years dead. Her brother, Silas, had come back from Cheyenne with 2 men who smelled of whiskey and cheap cigars. She could still see Silas's face, weak and wet, his eyes shifting. He held a piece of paper, a forged deed. "It's mine now, Annie," he'd whispered, while his hired men stood behind him, smiling. "Pa always meant for me to have it. You're just a woman. You can't run it." "You're a liar and a thief, Silas," she had spat. "Pa left it to me. He knew you were weak." That was when he'd nodded to the men. The memory was not hazy. It was sharp as glass. The grab, her fist connecting with one man's teeth. The laugh from the other. The blow that sent her sprawling into the hay. They had not been gentle. Silas had stood by the door, watching. As they beat her, they were hired to break her spirit. To make her run, they kicked her ribs. One man held her down while the other struck her face. Over and over, the sound wet and sickening. "Had enough, little cowgirl?" one of them had panted, his face slick with sweat. She had tasted blood and dirt. She had looked past them, at her brother. His face was pale. He wouldn't meet her eyes. That was the blow that broke her. Not the fist, but the betrayal. They had left her there, broken and bleeding in the straw, thinking the fight was gone. That night, with 2 ribs cracked and her face swollen shut, she had stolen a horse, taken a side of bacon and her father's old hunting knife, and she had fled. She had run east, away from the land, away from the only home she had ever known. She never looked back. Until now. A shadow fell over her small fire. Annabeth's eyes snapped open, her hand flying to the hunting knife she still carried at her belt. Levi Boone stood at the edge of her camp. He held a tin plate and a cup. "You'll need more than that fire," he said. He gestured with the plate. "Rabbit stew. It's hot." She stared at him, her hand tight on the knife. He made no move to come closer. He was just a shape against the stars, the wind whipping his long hair. He had moved like a shadow. "I don't need your food," she rasped. "I know," he said. He set the plate and the cup on a flat stone just outside her camp circle. But it's a waste to throw it out. He did not leave. He stood there, watching her, his gaze as steady as the mountains behind him. He was not unkind. She had seen unkind. This was something else. This was caution. "Why are you here?" she demanded. "To make sure the old woman doesn't freeze on your doorstep." Something like that. He admitted. He hunkered down on his heels, keeping his distance. He looked at her small fire, then at the ruins around them. This was the barn. You know it was. We salvaged most of the wood for the longhouse. It was good, seasoned timber. Annabeth felt a fresh spike of rage. "You picked the bones!" "We used what the land offered," he countered, his voice still quiet, but with a new edge. "Just like we used the house. This land was abandoned. It was dead. We brought it back to life."
"It was never abandoned,"
Annabeth said, her voice shaking.
"It was stolen."
Levi looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something move in those slate-gray eyes. It wasn't pity. It looked like recognition. She sensed, in that moment, that this man knew what it was to be wounded. He, too, was a survivor of something. "Stolen, abandoned. The land doesn't care about the words, ma'am," he said. "It only cares about the hands that work it. We've been working it for 10 years. You've been gone for 30. "I have the deed," she said, the words feeling thin and weak against the howling wind. "Signed by the territorial governor. This land is mine. By law." Levi Boone almost smiled. It was a cold, bitter expression. "Law? There is no law out here but the harvest. There is no law but the winter. You bring your piece of paper to the sheriff in Elkhorn Springs. See what he says. He knows us. He knows we pay our taxes in corn and pelts. Who are you to him? You're a ghost." His words hit her harder than the fists of her brother's men, because they were true.
"You are thieves,"
she whispered, pulling the word up from that deep, cold well of anger. He stood up. The wind tore at his coat. "And you are a fool, Annabeth Coulter. If you think that deed will keep you warm tonight, we are not thieves. We are the ones who stayed." "I stayed as long as I could. It wasn't long enough." He turned to leave, then paused. "Eat the stew. A fight is coming. You'll need your strength." He vanished back into the darkness, toward the warm, bright lights of her stolen house. Annabeth stared at the plate. The steam rose in a small, white plume against the darkness. She smelled the rabbit, the onion, the thyme. She was starving. She waited until his footsteps were long gone, swallowed by the wind. Then, her hands shaking with humiliation and a desperate, gnawing hunger, she reached for the plate. The stew was hot. It burned her mouth. She ate it all, huddled in the ruins, the howls of the coyotes sounding like laughter. The argument burned in her mind. He was wrong. He was a squatter. He was a thief. But as she licked the last of the stew from the tin plate, a strange, unwelcome heat stirred inside her. It was not just the food. It was the clash. He had not treated her like a weak old woman. He had treated her like an equal. He had argued with her. He had challenged her. She looked at the lights of the house, at the life glowing where she had expected only death. Levi Boone was right about one thing. A fight was coming. And she, Annabeth Coulter, had just found a reason to fight again. The sun rose thin and watery, offering no warmth. Annabeth woke stiff and aching, the cold having settled deep in her joints. Her camp within the barn's foundation stones felt like a grave. She saw movement from the commune, figures moving about, smoke rising thick and steady from the main house. They were eating breakfast. In her house. The stew plate from last night was clean. She had left it on the stone, a silent, defiant message that she was not beholden to him. Levi Boone had not come back for it. She ignored the growing ache in her stomach. She hitched the mule, her movements economical and stiff. She would not fight them with her hands. Not yet. She would fight them with the law. Levi Boone wanted to talk about the law. She would bring it down on him. She guided the mule cart back down the trail toward Elkhorn Springs. The ride felt longer this time, every rut in the road jarring her bones. The commune members watched her go. She saw the young woman, Ruth, standing near the new garden, her arms crossed. She did not wave. Elkhorn Springs was busier in the morning light. Wagons were parked outside the mercantile. Men gathered outside the saloon, even though it was barely 9 in the morning. She bypassed them all, heading for the small, clapboard building with the words County Records painted unevenly on the window. A thin man with a green visor and ink-stained cuffs looked up as she entered. He was chewing on the end of a pen. "Help you?" he asked, his voice bored. "I need to see the original land grant and deed for the Coulter homestead, North Range, up by the bluffs." The clerk stopped chewing. He looked her over, taking in her worn coat, her wind-burned face, and the unyielding set of her jaw. "Coulter," he repeated, tasting the name. "Ain't heard that name in a long time. Most folks figured they were all gone." "I am Annabeth Coulter," she said, her voice flat. "The deed is in my name, or my father's. Amos Coulter. I am here to get a copy." The clerk sighed, as if she had asked him to move a mountain. He pushed back his stool and disappeared into a back room stacked high with ledgers. Annabeth stood in the dusty silence, smelling old paper and stale tobacco. She heard him muttering, pages turning. He was gone for nearly 20 minutes. When he returned, he was wiping dust from his hands on his trousers. "Well, there's a file," he said, non-committal. "But it's thin. Got the original territorial grant to Amos Coulter. That's here. But the transfer deeds, they're a mess." "What do you mean, a mess?" "Means there's a quit-claim deed from one Silas Coulter to a land spec company out of Cheyenne, dated 1863, and then there's nothing. Company went bust a year later. Far as the county's concerned, that land's been fallow for 30 years. Unclaimed." "Silas Coulter had no right to sign that deed?" Annabeth said, her voice dropping, the cold fury rising. "It was a forgery." The clerk held up his ink-stained hands. "Ma'am, I don't make the history. I just file it. You're telling me about a dispute from 30 years ago? The paper I got says the Coulter family sold out. If you say it's yours, you'll need a lawyer, and a judge, and probably a miracle." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And I'll tell you something else. Sheriff Randall ain't gonna look kindly on you stirring up trouble for those folks up at the old ranch. Those folks are squatters." "Those folks are quiet," the clerk countered. "They trade fair. They don't start trouble. Town's happy to leave 'em be. You're digging up bones. Folks around here don't like the smell." Annabeth felt the trap closing. This was not the simple matter of ownership she had expected. This was a healed-over wound, and she was ripping it open. "Where is the sheriff?" she asked. The clerk pointed out the window. "His office, 2 doors down. But don't say I didn't warn you." Sheriff Randall's office was small and smelled of stale cigar smoke and gun oil. The man himself matched the room. He was old, with a drooping gray mustache stained yellow with tobacco, and a belly that strained his vest. His tin star was tarnished. He sat with his boots up on his desk, carving a piece of wood with a pocket knife. He didn't stand when she entered. He just watched her from under heavy, sly eyelids. "Sheriff Randall? That's me. What can I do for you, ma'am?" "My name is Annabeth Coulter. I've come to reclaim my family's land. The old Coulter homestead. There are people living on it. Squatters. I want them removed." Randall slowly closed his knife and put it in his pocket. He swung his boots off the desk and leaned forward, clasping his hands over his belly. "Annabeth Coulter," he said, drawing the name out. "Lord, I ain't heard that name since I was a deputy. That was 30 years ago. More." 30 years exactly," Annabeth said. And you've come back, he chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Well, most folks figured you for dead. Or in California. Or worse. I am here for my land. The sheriff's folksy manner vanished. His eyes went flat and cold. Your land? That's a funny way to put it. Far as this town is concerned, that land's been abandoned since your brother, Silas, lit out. The town council's considered seizing it for back taxes a dozen times. Silas stole that land. The deed he used was forged. That's a powerful accusation to make against the dead. Mrs. Coulter, or is it Miss? I can't recall.
It's Mrs. Coulter,
she said, her jaw tight.
And it's the truth.
Truth, Randall mused. He picked up a cigar butt and examined it. Truth in Elkhorn Springs is what people remember, and what I remember, and what the town remembers, is that the Coulter name means trouble. Old Amos, your PA, he was a hard man, made enemies, and your brother, he left a pile of debt. He paused, his gaze sharpening. And then there was you. What about me? The story I recall, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, was that the Coulter girl, wild as a hawk, she shacked up with some gambler, robbed her own kin of what little was left and ran off with him in the middle of the night. Left her brother to face the creditors. Annabeth's blood went ice cold. She could feel the ghosts of the blows from 30 years ago, the taste of blood in her mouth. This was the story Silas had told. This was the lie that had festered here for 3 decades. That is a lie, she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage so white-hot it scared her. Maybe it is, Randall said, shrugging. Maybe it ain't. Don't matter. What matters is that's the story that stuck. And now you show up, 30 years later, a ghost nobody wants to see, trying to kick out a group of harmless folks who've been minding their own business for 10 years. He stood up, his bulk filling the small room. So, here's my advice. Mrs. Coulter, you get back in that mule cart, and you ride on. There is nothing for you here. Those people up on the ridge are under my protection, such as it is. You stir up trouble, and I'll have you in that cell for vagrancy and disturbing the peace before sundown. You understand me? She stared at him, at the tarnished star, the smug, corrupt certainty in his eyes. She saw the whole town laid out before her, the clerk, the sheriff, the whispers. They had their story, and it was neat and tidy. She was the villain. Levi Boone and his people were the harmless victims. She turned without another word. She walked out of the office, her back straight, and did not stop until she was on her cart and whipping the tired mule into a trot. She stormed out of Elkhorn Springs, the dust of its judgment clinging to her. She arrived back at the homestead in the late afternoon. The fury had cooled into a hard, heavy stone of despair in her gut. She had no law. She had no name. She had only a patch of dirt by a ruined wall. She unhitched the mule and set about making her fire, her movements jerky. She was trapped. That evening, as the sky turned a deep, bruised purple, Levi Boone approached her camp again. This time, he carried nothing. She saw him coming and gripped the handle of her knife. If you've come to gloat, save your breath. He stopped at the edge of the firelight. He looked tired. I saw you ride out this morning. Figured you were heading to town. Figured you'd be talking to Randall. And you let me go. It wasn't my place to stop you. You had to hear it for yourself. He called you harmless. Annabeth spat. He said you were under his protection. What arrangement do you have with that pig? The arrangement, Levi said, his voice level, is that we stay quiet. We don't come to town except for supplies. We don't ask for help. We don't vote. We don't exist. In exchange, he lets us be. He gets to tell the town he's charitable, letting squatters live on abandoned land. And you're happy with that? Hiding, living on scraps from a man like Randall. Levi's jaw tightened. I'm not happy. I'm surviving, and I'm keeping my people safe. That's all that matters. Your people, she said, the word a sneer.
Who are they? A pack of thieves? Like you?
Levi looked at her for a long time. The firelight carved shadows under his high cheekbones. He looked older than he had the day before.
You want to know who they are?
He said, his voice low. Come with me. He turned and walked toward the longhouse. Annabeth, fueled by a bitter, desperate curiosity, wiped her hands on her trousers, grabbed her knife, and followed him. He didn't take her into the main house. He took her to the long, low building she had seen, the one that looked like a barracks. Inside, a single lantern burned. It was a dining hall, simple and clean, with long trestle tables. People were finishing a thin-looking soup. They stopped talking when she and Levi entered. All eyes turned to her. It was a room full of ghosts. This is Martha, Levi said, gesturing to a woman with a badly scarred face who was ladling soup. Her husband used to beat her every Saturday. One night, she hit him back. He died. She served 4 years in the state prison before they let her go. The woman, Martha, nodded at Annabeth, her eyes holding no shame.
Those two.
He pointed to a pair of young men, barely out of their teens, eating silently in the corner. They were miners up in South Pass, got accused of stealing from the company store. They didn't do it, but they were different. The other miners were happy to run them out. He walked further. Ruth. You've met Ruth. She was working in a saloon in Cheyenne. A man decided she owed him more than a dance. She disagreed. Nearly killed him. She was 14. She's 19 now. Ruth glared at Annabeth, her face a mask of defiance. He continued, his voice a steady, quiet inventory of the broken and the lost. Widows with children, run out of their homes by their husbands' families. A former preacher who had lost his faith in his mind, now sitting quietly, braiding a piece of rope. Women who had fled brothels, their bodies used up, their spirits hanging by a thread.
We are not an ideology, Mrs. Coulter, Levi said, his voice resonating in the quiet room. We are not thinkers. We are what's left over. We are the ones who didn't fit, the ones who were thrown away. This isn't a commune. It's a refuge.
Annabeth looked at the faces. She saw suspicion in some. She saw weariness in all of them. But she also saw a fierce, quiet pride. They were survivors.
And you?
She asked, turning to Levi.
Which one are you?
Levi's face closed. The guarded look was back, impenetrable. I'm the one who found the empty house. That's all you need to know. He had told her their story, but not his own. A small movement at her elbow made her flinch. She looked down. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7, was standing beside her. She was thin, with enormous dark eyes and tangled, mousy hair. She stared up at Annabeth with a solemnity that was unnatural in a child. The girl, Clara, held out her hand. In her palm was a small, smooth river stone, gray and perfectly round. Annabeth stared at the stone. She did not move. The girl pushed her hand closer, insistent. Slowly, Annabeth reached out and took the stone. It was cold. Her fingers brushed the girl's small, dry palm. A jolt went through Annabeth, so sharp it was like a physical pain. It was a memory, sudden and blinding. The weight of a newborn, a baby girl, born silent and blue in a cold cabin in the east. A daughter she had held for only an hour. A daughter she had buried in a small, unmarked box. A daughter she had never allowed herself to mourn. Annabeth's hand closed around the stone so tightly her knuckles went white. She looked at Clara, who was still watching her, her head tilted. Annabeth turned and fled the longhouse. She did not stop until she was back at her fire, her breath coming in ragged, tearing sobs. She had not cried for her husband. She had not cried for her estranged son, but the touch of this orphan girl, this ghost, had broken her. The next few days, a truce settled. It was unspoken. Annabeth stayed at her ruin. The commune stayed in her house. But she watched them. She watched them work. They were clumsy. The young men, The miners chopped wood with more strength than skill, wasting half their swings. Ruth, tending the garden, pulled weeds with a jerky anger. Annabeth couldn't stand it. She couldn't sit idle and watch people do things the wrong way. The next morning, she walked over to the woodpile, where one of the young men was struggling with a thick, knotted log. "You're fighting it," she said, her voice rough. He looked up, startled. "Give me the axe." He handed it over. Annabeth settled the log. She studied the grain, found the fracture line. She raised the axe, her body moving in a fluid, practiced motion she had not used in decades, and brought it down. The log split clean in two. She handed the axe back. "Aim for the crack. Don't fight the wood. Let the axe do the work." She walked away before he could answer. Later that day, she saw Ruth trying to mend a sagging fence line. The wire was loose. Annabeth stopped. "You're pulling it against the post. You need leverage." She picked up a sturdy stick, showed her how to brace it. Twist the wire until it was taut, then secure it. Ruth watched. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't say thank you, but when Annabeth walked away, the girl went back to the fence, copying her movement exactly. She began to work. She did not work for them. She worked for the land. She worked because her hands, after 30 years of darning socks and kneading bread, itched for the feel of real labor. She mended fences. She cleaned out the mule stable. She organized the woodpile until it was a fortress against the coming winter. They watched her. They gave her space. They left a plate of food on the stone by her camp every night. She ate it. She was building her strength. One evening, back at her own camp, she sat by the fire, trying to dig a splinter out of her palm. It was deep, a shard of old fence post, and it was lodged under the skin. She was trying to get at it with the tip of her knife, her left hand clumsy and bloody. "You'll get blood poisoning that way." Levi's voice, he was standing there, just at the edge of the light. He always moved like smoke. "I can manage," she said, biting her lip as she probed the wound. "You're driving it deeper." He stepped into the light and crouched beside her. "Give it here." "I don't need your help." "Annabeth," he said, and the use of her first name was a shock. His voice was not unkind. "Stop being proud for 1 minute and let me help you. I've dug bullets out of men. I can handle a splinter." She hesitated, then slowly, reluctantly, uncurled her fist and held out her hand. He took it. His hand was rough, calloused, and surprisingly warm. He held her palm steady in his grip. He took her knife, wiped it clean on his trousers, and then, with a surgeon's steady hand, he opened the wound just slightly. He was quick. He probed once, then again, and plucked the dark shard of wood free. Blood welled up. He didn't let go. He held her hand, his thumb pressing firmly on the wound to stop the bleeding. They sat like that in the silence. The only sounds were the crackle of her fire and the high, thin whine of the wind. His hand was large, completely covering hers. It was the first time a man had held her hand in 5 years, since Joseph died. No, this was different. This was not the dry, companionable hand of her husband. This was a current, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to travel from his skin to hers. She could feel the pulse in his thumb, steady and strong. She looked up. He was watching her, his slate-gray eyes unreadable in the firelight. He was not just looking at her hand. He was looking at her, and she, God help her, was looking back. The silence stretched. It was charged, heavy, filled with things that had no name. It was the awareness of a man and a woman, alone in the dark, in a vast, empty land. Annabeth pulled her hand away. The connection broke. The night air rushed in, cold on her skin. "Thank you," she said, her voice sounding strange and thin. She wrapped her hand in a piece of rag from her kit. Levi stood up. He seemed to shake himself, just slightly. "It'll be clean by morning." He paused, looking up at the sky. "Sky's yellow. There's a storm coming. A bad one."
You should sleep in the longhouse. I'm fine here, she said too quickly.
This ain't a rainstorm, he said. It's a duster. You stay out here, you'll smother. It'll be on us by morning.
He left her, but the heat from his hand lingered on her palm long after the blood had dried. He was right. She woke before dawn to a terrifying sound. The wind was not howling. It was screaming, a low, monstrous roar that shook the ground. The air was no longer clear. It was a thick, roiling wall of yellow-brown dust. She tried to stand, and the wind slammed her back against the stones. She pulled her blanket over her head, choking, grit filling her mouth, her eyes. The mule was braying, a sound of pure terror. She couldn't breathe. This was it. This was how it ended, smothered in the dirt of her own home. A shape appeared through the gloom. It was Levi. He was wrapped in canvas, a rope tied around his waist, goggles over his eyes. He looked like a creature from another world. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron.
"Come!" he yelled, his voice barely audible over the roar. "Now!"
She had no strength to fight. She could only follow. He dragged her, half carrying her, through the blinding, suffocating storm. She could feel the other end of the rope, held taut by someone else. Ruth. She saw, squinting. They were her anchor. He hauled her up the steps and threw open the door to the longhouse, shoving her inside and slamming it shut against the screaming wind. The room was dark, lanterns swaying. It was packed with people, all the Commune members, huddled together. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, fear and lamp oil. Annabeth leaned against the door, gasping, her lungs burning. She was soaked. The dust had mixed with her sweat, and she was covered in a cold, gritty mud. She began to shiver, a deep, bone-rattling shake she could not control. Someone put a cup of water in her hand. It was Martha. Annabeth drank, the water washing the mud from her throat. Levi pulled the goggles from his face. His eyes were red-rimmed. He saw her shaking. He grabbed a thick wool blanket from a pile and threw it around her shoulders, his hands rough. "You're frozen," he said. He began to rub her hands, chafing them hard between his own. "You stubborn old woman. You would have died out there." She couldn't speak. The shivering was too violent. His hands moved from her wrists to her arms, rubbing hard, trying to force warmth back into her. The shaking wouldn't stop. "Damn it!" he muttered. He moved behind her, pulling the blanket tight, and began to rub her back and shoulders. His hands were strong, kneading the frozen muscles through the wool. It was not gentle. It was practical. It was necessary. And it was the most profound touch she had felt in 30 years. His hands were solid, warm, and real. They were on her. They were forcing life back into her. The shaking began to subside, replaced by a different kind of tremor. She closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the door. The roar of the wind outside was a distant, angry God. Inside was this man's hands, moving on her back. "I haven't felt warm in years," she whispered. She didn't know she was going to say it. The words just fell out, a confession into the noise of the storm. Levi's hands stopped. They did not move away. They rested, heavy and warm, on her shoulders. He said nothing. He just stood there, his presence a shield against the cold. The storm raged for 2 days. They were all trapped in that long, dark room. People slept in shifts, huddled together for warmth. Annabeth was given a pallet of furs near the hearth, separate from the families. She was still the outsider. Levi took the spot by the door, a rifle beside him, as if he were guarding them all from the storm itself. She lay awake in the dark, listening to the wind trying to tear the house apart. She listened to the breathing of the 20 people packed into the room, and she was acutely, intensely aware of the man by the door. She was aware of the memory of his hands on her back. Nothing happened. He did not speak to her again. She did not speak to him, but every time she looked up, he seemed to be watching her. The storm had forced her inside.
It had breached her walls, and in the dark, with the wind howling like a judgment, something new and terrifying had begun to simmer. The world after the duster was scoured and quiet. The air, washed clean of dust, was sharp as glass and carried the first real bite of coming winter. Annabeth had refused the offer of a room in the house. The storm had been an emergency. This was a war. She had returned to her camp in the barn ruins, reinforcing the low stone walls, creating a windbreak that was more stubborn than practical. She was sorting through the last of her coffee beans when the rider approached. It was not Levi. It was a man wearing a deputy's star, looking uncomfortable on his horse. He stopped a polite distance from her fire. "Ma'am, Mrs. Coulter." "I'm Annabeth Coulter." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I'm to deliver this from the Elkhorn Springs Town Council." He didn't get down. He just leaned over and handed it to her. She unfolded it. It was not a legal document, but a formal-looking letter. It stated that the council had been made aware of an ownership dispute regarding the old Coulter claim. It said that disputed land, especially land with significant back taxes owed, was a liability. The council, it said, was considering its right to reclaim the land and put it to public auction to settle the 30-year-old tax debt. They gave her 30 days to prove undisputed title. Annabeth's hand closed around the paper. Auction, that was the word. "Who's the cattleman?" she asked, her voice flat. The deputy flinched. "Ma'am?" "The cattleman who wants this land, the one Randall is in bed with, the one who wants the water rights from the creek. Who is it?" The young deputy looked down at his saddle horn. "Folks say Bartholomew Higgins has been looking to expand his graze. That's all I know. This letter, it's just a formality, and, ma'am." "It's a threat," Annabeth said. She folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. "You can go." The deputy tipped his hat, looking relieved. He turned his horse and rode off, fast. She stood there, the cold wind whipping her hair, and felt the noose tighten. 30 days. She didn't have to wait long. Levi crossed the yard from the main house, his long strides eating up the ground. He had watched the entire exchange. His face was hard, his eyes cold as slate. "So," he said, stopping 10 feet away, "you did it." "I did nothing but claim what's mine." "You stirred the nest," he said, his voice a low, angry growl. "For 10 years. We've been here, 10 years. We were quiet. We were ghosts. Randall left us alone because we were useful. We were the harmless squatters he could point to. Now you've kicked the rock over. You've brought law into it." "That's right. It's time the law was here." "The law?" He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "That letter isn't the law. That's Bartholomew Higgins. That's a man who owns the bank, the sheriff, and half the county. That's a man who wants our water, and you just gave him the legal excuse to take it." "Our water?" Annabeth stepped toward him, her own anger rising. "This is my water, my land, my fight." "And what about them?" He jerked his head toward the longhouse, where Martha was hanging laundry. "What about Ruth? What about Clara? You think Higgins is just going to ask us to leave? He'll send Randall, and if Randall can't do it, he'll send men who can. You've just declared war, Mrs. Coulter, and you've put 20 innocent people on the front line." The accusation struck home, sharp and painful. "And what's your solution, Boone? Keep hiding? Keep paying tribute to that corrupt sheriff? You're a coward." His face went white. The quiet in him vanished, replaced by a terrifying, cold fury. He stepped close, looming over her. "A coward. I've buried a wife and 2 sons. I've watched men die for nothing. I am keeping these people alive. It is the only thing I have left to do. And I will not let you, with your 30-year-old pride and your piece of paper, burn them all down just to prove you were right." "You call this living?" she shot back, trembling, refusing to break his gaze. "You're living on scraps. You're hiding from the world. I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees, cowering in someone else's house." The words hung in the air. She had meant to wound him, and she had. He looked at her as if she were something he had never seen before, something venomous. "Then you'll die alone," he said, his voice flat. He turned his back on her and walked away. The argument left her shaking. She was choked with a rage that had nowhere to go. He was wrong. He was weak. And yet, the faces of the women in the longhouse, the small, solemn face of Clara, haunted her. She had to get out. She had to breathe. She saddled her mule. She needed to see the land, to trace its edges, to remind herself what she was fighting for. She rode out, not toward town, but north toward the bluffs. She rode along the shallow, rocky bed of the old creek. This was the lifeblood of the ranch. Even in the driest years, you could dig 6 inches and find water. It was why her father had built here. It was why Higgins wanted it. She dismounted, letting the mule graze on the dry autumn grass. She walked, her boots crunching on the gravel. She knelt by a pool of standing water, clear and cold, and splashed it on her face. The sting of it cleared her head. She remembered her father here, teaching her how to track a deer. She remembered sitting here with... No, she would not remember Silas. She was so lost in the memory that she didn't hear the horses until they were almost on her. 2 men. They were not cowboys. They were rough, dressed in trail-worn clothes, with pistols strapped low. They had the dead-eyed look of men who worked for wages, not for cattle. They reined in, blocking her path back to the mule. "That's a long way from home, old woman," one of them said. He had a thick, dark mustache and tobacco-stained teeth. Annabeth stood up slowly. Her knife was at her belt, but she knew it was useless. "This is my home. You're the ones trespassing." The second man, younger and thinner, laughed. "She's got spirit. Mister, Higgins don't like spirit. He just likes water." "You're Higgins' men," she stated. "We're just passing by," the first man said, his smile all menace. "And we saw you, Sheriff Randall. He's a friend of ours. He mentioned you, said you were a complication. He told you to move on." "I'm not moving." The man sighed, as if she were a difficult child. He swung down from his horse. "We were hoping you'd say that." He moved fast. Annabeth didn't have time to run. He grabbed the front of her coat, his fist bunching the fabric. She reacted on instinct, her nails raking his face. He grunted in surprise. Then his other hand came up and struck her, a hard, open-palmed blow that snapped her head back and sent her sprawling onto the rocks. Pain exploded in her cheek. She tasted blood. Her lip was split. "You old bitch!" he snarled, wiping the blood from his cheek. She tried to scramble up, but he was on her. He grabbed her by the arm and hauled her to her feet, only to slam her back against the rocky bank of the creek. The air rushed out of her lungs. "We ain't gonna kill you," the man panted, his face close to hers, his breath sour with whiskey. "We're just delivering a message." He shoved her, hard. She fell to her knees. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. She cried out. "This land ain't yours. It's Mr. Higgins's land. The sheriff says it's his. The town says it's his. You're just a ghost, and nobody wants you here." He let go of her hair and shoved her forward. She fell, her hands scraping on the gravel. "She ain't learned," the younger man said. Still on his horse. "She will." The first man walked over and grabbed her by the arm. He began to drag her, pulling her through the gravel and dirt toward the creek. Her shirt ripped on a sharp stone. "Please," she gasped, the fight knocked out of her. He laughed. "That's better." He dragged her into the shallow, icy water and let her fall. The cold shocked her to the bone. "You got till tomorrow to be gone. After that, we'll come back for the squatters. We'll burn that whole nest to the ground, and you with it. You understand me?" She lay there, shivering, half in and half out of the water, and nodded. "Good." He spat into the dirt near her head. "Tell your coward leader he's next." They grabbed the reins of her mule. "We'll take this as payment for the trouble." They mounted up and rode off, their laughter hanging in the cold, clean air. Annabeth lay in the creek for a long time, the ice water seeping into her clothes, the pain in her face and ribs a dull, heavy throb. It was the humiliation that hurt more. It was the echo, the feeling of being helpless, of being beaten down. She finally pulled herself out of the water. Her mule was gone. It was at least 3 miles back to the homestead. She began to walk. Every step was agony. Her ribs screamed, her lip was swelling, and the cut dripped blood onto her chin. She was soaked, and the wind was picking up as the sun began to dip behind the mountains. By the time she reached the ridge overlooking the homestead, it was dusk. The walk had been a blur of pain and shame. She had fled this land, broken, and now, 30 years later, she was crawling back, broken again. She stumbled into the yard. The lights were on in the house and the longhouse. People were moving about, preparing for the evening meal. She must have been a sight, a wraith caked in mud, her shirt torn open, her face a ruin. Ruth saw her first. The young woman was coming out of the longhouse. Her eyes went wide. She dropped the bucket she was carrying. "Levi!" she screamed. "Levi, come quick!" Annabeth leaned against the porch rail, her legs giving out. The main door of the house flew open. Levi stood there, silhouetted against the lamplight. He had been in the middle of a sentence. He stopped dead. He saw her. The blood, the mud, the torn shirt. The cold anger from their argument was gone, replaced by something dark and violent. He crossed the yard in 3 strides. He didn't say, "What happened?" He didn't ask if she was all right. His eyes were fixed on her face, and his hands were clenched into fists. "Who?" he said, his voice a rasp. "Higgins's men," she whispered. "Randall." He didn't hesitate. He slid one arm under her legs and the other behind her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. "I can walk," she protested. A faint spark of her pride left. "Be still," he commanded. He carried her past Ruth, past Martha, past the others who were now staring from the door of the longhouse. He carried her into the main house, not into the main room, but into his own small room at the back. It was Spartan, a narrow cot, a single chair, a small cast-iron stove glowing in the corner. He laid her gently on the cot. He lit the lantern on the table. The yellow light illuminated the damage. He stood looking down at her for a long second, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. Then he turned, grabbed a basin, and filled it with water from the pitcher on his dresser. He found a clean cloth. He came back and sat on the edge of the cot. He dipped the cloth in the water. "This will sting," he said. He began to wipe the blood and dirt from her face. His touch was not a man's touch. It was not rough. It was careful, precise, and infinitely gentle. He cleaned the split in her lip, his jaw tight. He cleaned the gravel from the scrape on her cheek. She flinched, but he held her head steady with his other hand. He saw the torn shirt, soaked with mud and creek water. "You're freezing." He stood and went to his dresser, pulling out a plain wool shirt. It was his. "Take that one off," he said, his voice low. She hesitated, her hands fumbling at the buttons, her fingers numb. She was ashamed. He saw her shaking and turned his back, giving her privacy. She peeled the wet, torn fabric off, her ribs aching with every move. She pulled his dry shirt on. It was huge. It fell to her knees and smelled of wood smoke and soap. She sat there, clutching it closed at her throat. Levi took her muddy, ripped shirt from the floor. He looked at it, his expression unreadable. He walked to the small stove, opened the firebox, and fed the shirt into the flames. "Levi, no," she whispered. He didn't answer. He watched it burn. He watched the evidence of her humiliation turn to black ash and smoke. It was a final, violent act of protection. He was erasing it. He closed the stove and came back to her. He sat on the cot again. The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fire. He had cleaned her wounds. He had burned the shirt, and now he just sat there, waiting. And she broke. It was not a cry. It was a sob, ripped from a place 30 years deep. It was the pain, the shame, the helplessness. It was the memory of the barn. It was the cold water of the creek. It was the loneliness of her life. She hunched over, and the sobs tore out of her. Levi did not speak. He did not pat her shoulder. He moved, sliding his arm around her back, pulling her against his chest. He held her. He held her tight, his hand pressing against her back, anchoring her. He was solid, a wall of warmth against the cold that had lived in her for decades. She wept into his shirt. She wept for the girl she had been, for the woman she had become. And he held her, his chin resting on the top of her head, his eyes closed, his body rigid with a fury that had nowhere to go.
It was the same,
she finally choked out, her voice muffled against his chest.
It was just the same.
Tell me, he commanded, his voice rough with emotion.
And she did.
The story poured out of her, a torrent of poison held back for 30 years. She told him about Silas, about the forged deed. She told him about the two men, their laughing faces, the smell of whiskey.
He watched,
she sobbed, clinging to him. My brother, he stood by the door, and he watched them beat me. He watched them break me, just so he could have the land. He left me in the straw, bleeding, and today, when he kicked me, it was the same, the exact same. She was trembling violently. He held her tighter, rocking her slightly, as if she were a child. He was absorbing her pain, taking it into himself. He said nothing. He just let her empty herself of the venom. The sobs slowly quieted. They were left in the silence, bound together by the confession. She was exhausted, hollowed out. She pulled back, just enough to look at him. The lantern light was soft, but she could see his face. It was undone. The guarded stillness was gone. His eyes were dark, full of a pain that matched her own. He looked at her mouth, at the cut he had cleaned. His hand came up, his thumb, rough and calloused, gently touching her swollen lip. She didn't flinch. She saw the hunger in his eyes. It was not lust. It was something deeper, rawer. It was the hunger of two people starved for life, for justice, for a single moment of warmth. She didn't know who moved first. His mouth came down on hers. It was not gentle. It was not a kiss of comfort. It was a collision. It was desperate, aching, and full of all the rage and pain of the last 30 years. His lips were hard, demanding, and she met him with the same force. Her hands, which had been clutching his shirt, moved up, grabbing his shoulders, holding on as if he were the only solid thing on earth. It was a kiss of shared wounds, of fury, of a terrible, sudden need. They broke apart, gasping. They stared at each other, their chests heaving. The hunger was there, naked between them. And it was terrifying. Levi stood up abruptly. His hands were shaking. He ran a hand through his hair, his back to her. He looked like a man on a precipice. I should go. You need to rest. He took a step toward the door. He was running. Don't, she said, her voice raw. He stopped, his hand on the door latch. He didn't turn. Don't pretend, she said, her voice stronger, that you're a better man than the one who wants me. The words hit him like a physical blow. He went still. He stood there for a long time, his back to her, the silence of the room screaming. Slowly, deliberately, he turned around. He looked at her. He looked at her sitting on his cot, wearing his shirt, her face bruised and swollen, her eyes wide and full of a terrible, matching honesty. He walked back to the cot. He did not sit. He reached down and blew out the lantern. The room plunged into darkness, lit only by the faint, pulsing red glow from the stove's grate. He sat on the cot. He didn't speak. He reached for her, his movements slow, deliberate,
He touched her face, his hands tracing the bruise on her cheek, then moving to her shoulders. She leaned into him. He kissed her again. This time, it was not a collision. It was an exploration. It was still desperate, still raw, but it was a question. She answered it, her mouth opening under his. That night, they gave in. It was not perfect. It was not the soft joining of two lovers. It was raw. It was clumsy, marked by the pain of her ribs, by the awkwardness of two people who had forgotten what it was to be touched. It was a raw, animal comfort, a desperate attempt to erase the cold, to find life in the midst of death. It was two broken, lonely people clinging together in the dark, seeking not love, but survival. Afterward, they lay tangled in the narrow cot, the wool blankets scratchy against their skin. Neither of them spoke. They were both trembling. The light in the small room was gray and cold. Annabeth woke first, her body a map of new and old aches. The throb in her ribs was a dull fire. Her lip was tight and swollen. And then there was a deeper, unfamiliar soreness, a reminder of the night, of the raw, desperate heat that had passed between them. She turned her head. Levi was asleep, his back to her. He was still in sleep. The harsh lines of his face were softened, but he did not look peaceful. He looked burdened. Regret settled on her, cold and heavy as the morning air. It had been a mistake, a moment of weakness born from violence and confession. It was not real. She slid from the narrow cot, her feet hitting the cold floorboards. His shirt, the one she had wept into, was on the floor. She looked at her own clothes, the ones she had worn back from the creek, now dry and stiff with mud. She had nothing else. She put them on, the rough fabric scraping her skin. She saw her reflection in a small, cracked piece of mirror hanging by the door. The bruise on her cheek was a dark, ugly purple. Her lip was split. She looked like what she was, a woman who had been beaten. She turned to the door, her hand on the latch. "Where are you going?" His voice was not the voice from the night. It was flat, dead. He had not moved. His back was still to her. "To my camp," she said, her own voice rough. "Good." He pushed himself up, swinging his legs over the side of the cot. He did not look at her. He reached for his trousers, his movements stiff. The silence in the room was brittle, charged with shame. Annabeth had to break it. "Levi, last night—" "There was no last night," he said, his voice sharp as he pulled on his boots. He finally stood and turned to face her. His eyes were cold, the slate gray hardened to granite. The man who had held her while she wept was gone. "That was a mistake," he said. "It was the long night, the fight. It meant nothing." "It meant something to me," she said, her voice small, her pride stinging. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "What? Did you think it was love? That's not what we do here. We don't have room for that. We survive. That is all. Survival doesn't leave room for feelings." His words were a slap, more painful than the blow from Higgins's man. He was dismissing her. He was dismissing the one moment of profound connection she had felt in decades. Her shame turned to a cold, rising fury. "Feelings? Is that what you call it? Or were you just using me?" He went still, his eyes narrowing. "You're a coward. Levi Boone." She spat, the words tasting like acid. "You accused me of burning this place down, but you are the one who is terrified. You hide behind these broken people, and last night, you were just hiding again. You were scared and ashamed, and you used my body to forget your guilt for 5 minutes." She had struck a nerve. She saw it in the sudden tensing of his jaw. He had no answer. He did not deny it. He simply stared at her, his face a mask of stone. "What happened in this room doesn't change anything," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Randall and Higgins will be back. Your fight is with them, not with me. Get your things. Go back to your camp." "I'm not going to my camp," she said, her hand gripping the door latch. "I'm going to town. I'm going to finish this."
"You're a fool," he said. "You'll get yourself killed."
"It's better than being a ghost," she retorted. She pulled the door open and left, slamming it shut behind her. She stormed out of the house. The yard was quiet. The Commune members were already at work, casting wary, fearful glances at her. They had seen her carried in. They saw her leaving now, her face bruised, her spirit radiating fury. She saw Ruth by the well, who just stared, her face a mix of suspicion and something that might have been pity. Annabeth ignored them. She strode to the small, makeshift corral. Her mule was gone, stolen by Higgins's men. She needed a horse. She grabbed the bridle of a sorrel mare, a sturdy, plain-looking horse. "You can't take that." Ruth was there, blocking her way. "That's our horse." "I'm borrowing it," Annabeth said, her hands already working on the straps. "You're not. You're the reason this is all happening," Levi said. "Levi doesn't speak for me," Annabeth cut her off. "Get out of my way, girl." "I won't." Ruth stood her ground, though she looked afraid. "Give her the horse, Ruth." Levi was standing on the porch, his coat on, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. He wouldn't look at Annabeth. He was looking at the mountains. "But, Levi, she's—" "I want her gone," he said, his voice flat and carrying on the cold air. "If she wants to ride to her own destruction, let her. It's not our concern." Ruth's face crumpled in confusion, but she stepped aside. Annabeth finished saddling the mare. She mounted in one stiff, pained movement. She looked at Levi. He still wouldn't meet her eyes. She turned the horse and kicked it into a trot, leaving him and his house of ghosts behind her. The ride to town was a cold, miserable journey. Every jolt of the horse sent a spike of pain through her ribs. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the burning humiliation. He had used her. He had dismissed her. He was a coward, hiding from a fight, and worse, hiding from the one moment of warmth they had shared. Fine. She had been alone for 30 years. She would be alone for this. She arrived in Elkhorn Springs looking like a nightmare. Her bruised face and the Commune's horse earned her stares of open hostility and fear. People melted away from her on the boardwalk. She was the trouble. She was the plague. She ignored them. She found the small, dusty office of Mr. Abernathy, the only lawyer in town who wasn't directly employed by Bartholomew Higgins. Abernathy was a small, bird-like man with spectacles so thick they made his eyes look huge. He was sorting a mountain of disorganized papers. "Mr. Abernathy." He looked up, startled. He saw her face and his eyes widened. "Good Lord, woman! What happened to you?" "What's happening to this whole town?" Annabeth said. "I am Annabeth Coulter. I need to hire you." He sighed, taking off his spectacles to polish them. "Mrs. Coulter, I've heard you were back. I've also heard you were strongly advised to leave." "I am not leaving. I am filing a legal claim for my land. I was beaten and run off it 30 years ago on a forged deed. I was beaten yesterday by the men who want to steal it again. I need you to file the papers. Today." Abernathy put his spectacles back on. He looked at her, his bird-like gaze surprisingly sharp. "Ma'am, a claim like this, it requires a retainer, a significant one, and it requires proof. You are going up against Bartholomew Higgins. That is not a fight one wins lightly." "I have proof. The original deed my brother used is a forgery. His signature is on it. I need you to get the territorial records from Cheyenne." "That costs money." "Mrs. Coulter, travel, telegrams, filing fees." Annabeth reached under her collar. She pulled out a thin gold chain. On it was a small, heavy gold locket. It had been her mother's. It was the only thing of value she had carried with her from the East. She unclasped it and laid it on the dusty desk. "This was my mother's," she said, her voice thick. "It is worth at least $200.
That is your retainer. You file the papers. You find the proof. You get my land back."
Abernathy looked at the locket. He looked at her bruised, determined face. He slowly picked up the locket, weighing it in his hand.
"This isn't just about the land, is it, Mrs. Coulter?" he asked, his voice soft.
"This is about blood."
"It's about justice," she said. "Will you do it?"
He closed his hand around the locket. "Yes, I will. I will file the injunction this afternoon. It may not stop them, but it will be a start." She nodded, her business done. She felt hollow, having sold the last piece of her past, but she also felt a grim, cold satisfaction. The fight had begun. She left his office. She was walking toward the Mercantile to buy bandages when she saw the town doctor, a man named Hayes, hurrying out of his office. He saw her and stopped.
"Mrs. Coulter," he said, his face grim. "I see you met Mr. Higgins' welcoming party."
"I'm fine," she said.
"They're animals," he muttered. He looked agitated, grabbing his bag. "But you've kicked the whole hive. You should know. Randall and a half-dozen of his deputies rode out to the ridge about an hour ago. Said they were serving an eviction notice."
Annabeth's blood turned to ice. What? On what grounds? Disputed territory. Squatting. A legal technicality. But with guns, a technicality is as good as a writ. I heard there was trouble. A lot of shouting. I just saw one of Higgins' men ride back into town for more timber. Said they were clearing the land. Annabeth did not wait to hear more. She ran to the horse, her ribs screaming in protest, and hauled herself into the saddle. She rode out of town, whipping the mare into a gallop. He had called her a fool. He had pushed her away. He had said it was her fight, but they were his people. They were defenseless. And this was her fault. The fury she felt was no longer for Levi. It was for Randall. It was for herself. She had started this war, and she had left the innocent to face the first battle. While she was in town, Sheriff Randall had arrived at the Commune. He was not alone. He had 2 deputies and 4 of Higgins's men, including the 2 who had attacked Annabeth. They carried rifles and crowbars. Levi saw them coming. He met them in the yard. His face was a mask of cold control.
"Sheriff," he said, his voice level, "this is a surprise."
"It shouldn't be."
"Boone," Randall sneered, unfolding a paper. "This here is a writ from the town council. This land is under dispute. You and your family are hereby evicted for squatting. You've got 1 hour to clear out." Panic rippled through the commune members who had gathered behind Levi. Martha clutched her baby. Ruth moved forward, her face white with anger. But Levi put a hand out to stop her. "Sheriff, you and I have an arrangement," Levi said, his voice low. "The arrangement is over," Randall said, smiling. "The Coulter woman broke it. She filed a claim. Now it's a legal matter. And until the court decides, this land is town property, and the town wants it cleared. Now." "You can't," Levi said. "There are women, children. Where are we supposed to go? Winter's almost here." "Not my problem," Randall said. He nodded to his men. "Start with that one." He pointed to a small, new cabin where Martha and her baby lived. 2 of Higgins's men moved forward with crowbars. "No," Levi said. He didn't move. He just blocked their path. "You are not destroying our homes." "Get out of the way, Boone," the man with the dark mustache said. "No." The man looked at Randall. The sheriff nodded. "He's obstructing the law." The man swung the crowbar, not at the house, but at Levi. Levi caught the blow on his forearm, a sickening crack echoing in the yard. He didn't make a sound. The second man moved in, striking him in the ribs. Levi doubled over. "Stop!" Ruth screamed, running forward. One of the deputies grabbed her, throwing her back into the dirt. The 2 men began to beat Levi. They were methodical. They were punishing him for his defiance. Levi didn't fight back. He sank to his knees, his arms up to protect his head, taking the blows. He knew if he fought, they would have an excuse to use their guns. He had to protect his people. He had to endure. He was silent. He took the kicks, the punches, the blows from the wooden handle of the crowbar. He was disappearing inside himself, to the cold, quiet place where he hid from the world. The commune members were sobbing, screaming, helpless. Randall watched, his face bored. "That's enough," he said, when Levi was barely conscious, curled on the ground. Then, from the crowd, a small figure darted out. It was Clara. The little girl ran to Levi's side, her face streaked with tears. "Stop hurting him!" she shrieked, her voice high and terrified. "Leave him alone!" One of Higgins's men, the younger one, laughed. He reached down and grabbed Clara by the arm, yanking her up. "Get out of here, you little rat!" He raised his hand to backhand her, and the silence broke. Levi, from the ground, let out a roar. It was not a word. It was a sound of pure, primal rage, the sound of a bear defending its cub. It was the sound of a man who had lost everything, and would not, could not, lose one more thing. He launched himself from the ground. He was a bloody, broken mess, but he moved with terrifying speed. He slammed his shoulder into the man holding Clara, sending him flying. He grabbed the girl, pulling her behind him, and stood, swaying between her and the stunned men. His face was a mask of blood. One eye was swollen shut. He was trembling, but he was standing. "Touch her again," Levi rasped, his voice unrecognizable. "And I will kill you all." Randall unholstered his pistol. "That's assault, Boone. You've just assaulted an officer of the—" He stopped. The yard was silent. Levi stood, a bleeding guardian, shielding the child. Even Randall's men looked uneasy. This was not what they had signed on for. Randall slowly lowered his pistol. He sneered. "You're done, Boone. You're all done." He looked at his men. "Tear the cabins down. Leave the main house. For now." The men, eager to do something other than fight the bleeding man, turned to the cabins. With shouts and curses, they forced the commune members to watch as they began to destroy their homes. When Annabeth galloped over the final ridge, the sight made her sick. 2 cabins were in ruins, piles of timber. The commune members were huddled in a weeping group by the longhouse. Randall and his men were riding away, laughing. She rode into the yard, her fury a cold, hard stone in her chest. "This is your fault," Ruth screamed, running at her. "This is what you did. Look at it. I hope you're happy." "Where is he?" Annabeth asked, her voice tight, as she swung down from the horse. "We don't know," Martha said, her face pale, her baby crying. He went after they left." Annabeth knew where he was. She walked past the ruined cabins, past the weeping women. She walked to the ruins of the old barn, to her camp. He was there. He was sitting with his back against the low stone wall. Just as she had sat, he was a ruin, just like the barn. His shirt was ripped and soaked in blood. His face was— She had to look away. It was swollen, cut, and masked in drying blood. One eye was completely closed. He heard her steps and looked up. His one good eye was glassy, unfocused. When he saw her, a deep, shuddering shame crossed his face. He tried to turn his head away, to hide. "Go," he whispered, his voice broken. "Haven't you seen enough? Just go." She didn't speak. She walked to her camp kit, took her canteen and the clean cloth she had bought in town. She knelt in the dirt in front of him. He flinched when she reached for him, expecting a blow. "Be still," she whispered, her voice breaking. She gently cupped his face in her palms. His skin was cold. He was shaking. She held him, just for a moment, her thumbs stroking the unbruised skin at his temples. He was ashamed she had seen him like this, beaten, broken, defeated. "It's all right," she said, though it was a lie. She dipped the cloth in the water and began, with infinite care, to wash the blood from his face. He closed his good eye, a single tear mixing with the bloody water as it traced a path down his cheek. He did not pull away. He leaned into her touch, a broken man accepting the one small comfort he had left. She led him back to the house, to his small, dark room. The Commune members watched them go, their anger at her muted by their fear for him. She spent an hour tending to him. There were no deep wounds, just a constellation of cuts, bruises, and scrapes. His ribs were certainly cracked. She cleaned him up, her hands steady, her heart aching. He said nothing. He just sat on the cot, glassy-eyed, his body trembling with shock and pain. She gave him laudanum for the pain, and he finally lay back. That night, the house was silent. The Commune members crowded into the longhouse, afraid to be separated. Annabeth stayed in Levi's room, sitting in the chair, watching him sleep in the dark. She must have dozed. She woke when she felt him move. He was awake, his one good eye open, watching her in the darkness. "You're still here," he whispered. His voice was thick with pain. "I'm still here." She stood and sat on the edge of the cot. He was shivering. She pulled the blanket up, but he was cold to the core. Without a word, she slid onto the cot beside him, lifting the blankets and slipping in, pulling them over both of them. She lay on her back, he on his. The silence was thick. "I'm sorry," she whispered. This was my fault." "No," he rasped. "It was coming. You just hurried it." He turned his head toward her. His bruised face was a shadow in the dark. He moved, slowly, hissing in pain as his ribs protested. He turned onto his side, to face her. His hand came up, finding her face in the dark. He touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the bruise he had not been there to prevent. He leaned in. He did not kiss her mouth. He pressed his lips, gently, to her throat, just below her ear, where her pulse beat strong and fast. It was a kiss that asked for nothing. It was a kiss of gratitude. It was quiet and deep, and felt almost holy. She closed her eyes, a tremor running through her. She found his hand, his rough, calloused hand, and gripped it tight, her fingers laced with his. "We deserve at least one night like this," she whispered, her voice thick. One night of peace, one night where they were not a squatter and a ghost, just a man and a woman, holding on in the dark before the real war began. He gripped her hand tighter, and in the cold, silent house, surrounded by ruin, they fell asleep. 3 days passed. A fragile, wounded quiet settled over the homestead. Levi's face was a ruin of purple and yellow bruises, one eye swollen, completely shut. He moved stiffly, his cracked ribs binding his breath, but he did not stop working. He and the 2 young miners, James and Peter, began salvaging the timber from the 2 destroyed cabins, stacking it, preparing to rebuild. The Commune members were tense, huddled together. They treated Annabeth with a new, fearful respect. She was the one who had brought the law down on them. But she was also the one who had tended to Levi, the one who had not fled. She, too, worked. She cooked alongside Martha, her hands plunging into hot, soapy water, scrubbing pots. The work was simple, grounding. She and Levi did not speak of the night in his room. They did not speak of the beating. They orbited each other, 2 scarred planets held in a grim, silent gravity. On the 4th day, a buggy rattled into the yard. It was Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer. He was not alone. He had a younger man with him, a clerk. Annabeth and Levi met him near the porch. Levi stood, his body a testament to Randall's brutality. Abernathy's eyes widened when he saw him. "Good God," Abernathy whispered. "They did this." "They did," Levi said, his voice a low rasp. "Do you have news, Mr. Abernathy?" I do, the lawyer said, his bird-like nervousness replaced by a thin, steely anger. He had seen the violence of his opponents. I did not just send telegrams. I took the train to Cheyenne myself. I knew the clerk in the Territorial Records office from 20 years ago. I paid him $10 to open the ledgers, the ones from before the fire of '78. He pulled a sheaf of papers from his satchel. He found it, the original Land Spec Company file, and in it, the quit-claim deed signed by Silas Coulter. He laid it on a barrelhead. Annabeth looked down. There it was, her brother's name. "And this," Abernathy said, laying a second, older paper beside it, "is a bank ledger from the same year, a loan application Silas Coulter filled out 6 months prior." Annabeth looked at the two signatures. She didn't need to be an expert. The signature on the loan application was flowery, uncertain. The signature on the deed was sharp, precise, and completely different. "It's a forgery," Annabeth whispered. The words felt heavy, final. "It is an obvious and blatant forgery," Abernathy confirmed. "Whoever your brother hired to make this deed, they signed his name for him. This deed, which transferred the land to the Spec Company, is fraudulent. It was never legal. The company went bust, but their claim was invalid from the start, which means the title never left your father's estate, and as his sole living heir—" He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "The land is yours, Mrs. Coulter, every acre, free and clear." The wind kicked up, blowing dust across the yard. Annabeth stared at the papers. 30 years of lies, undone by 2 pieces of paper. She had won. She felt Levi shift beside her. He had not moved, but the air around him had gone cold. She looked at him. He was not looking at the papers. He was looking at her. His one good eye was full of a terrible, quiet despair. She had her proof. Her claim was absolute, and by that law, every person on this land, including the man standing next to her, was a trespasser. Abernathy, sensing the new, terrible tension, cleared his throat. "I will file the papers with the circuit judge immediately. He can issue a writ, confirming your title and ordering the removal of any current occupants." Levi's face was stone. He was waiting for her judgment. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy," Annabeth said, her voice steady. "Leave the copies with me. Send me your bill." The lawyer, relieved to be done, gathered his other papers, nodded curtly, and hurried back to his buggy. Annabeth and Levi stood in the yard, the proof of her ownership sitting on the barrel between them. "So," Levi said, his voice rough, "you've done it. You have your justice." "It seems so." "And what now?" He gestured to the half-built frame of a new cabin. "What about our justice? You have the paper. Higgins has the guns. And we are on your land." His bitterness was a sharp blade. He saw this as the end. She was now the landlord, and he the squatter. "Is that what you think I am?" she asked. "I don't know what you are," he admitted, his good eye searching her face. "You're a ghost. You're a woman who was beaten. I don't know." She looked at the papers. She looked at his bruised face. She looked at the house her father had built, the house he and his people had saved from rot. She had come back for the land, but the land was just dirt. It was the house, the water, the life. That was the prize. "When I was in town," she said, thinking aloud, "I saw the map in the records office. My father's claim. It's 2 square miles. It includes the creek, and it runs all the way to the eastern ridge." "I know the boundaries," Levi said. "They won't let us stay," Annabeth said. "Not to him, but to the wind. Higgins will never let us stay. If I claim it, he'll fight me in court until I'm broke. If I don't claim it, he'll burn you out. He'll use my claim to say the land is in dispute, and he'll have Randall clear it for him." "We are trapped," Levi agreed. "No," Annabeth said. A new, hard idea was forming. "Not trapped. We've been fighting his fight. We need to fight ours.
She looked at him. I have an idea, a new one. We don't just claim the land, we divide it, legally. Levi stared at her, uncomprehending. I keep this, she said, gesturing to the main house, the barn ruins, the yard, the homestead proper. It's my home. I grant communal title, a legal binding deed. For the Eastern Ridge to you, to the Commune. We file papers that grant permanent water access from the creek to both properties. We make it legal, not one claim, but two, side by side. He was stunned. He saw the brilliance of it. It wasn't one woman against Higgins. It was two legal landowners, bound by a shared water right. They'll never allow it, he whispered. But a spark of something, hope, had lit in his one good eye. They won't have a choice. Annabeth said, The land is mine. I can do with it as I please, and I please to do this. They rode to town 2 days later. Levi's face was still a mosaic of bruises, but he sat straight in the saddle. They were not petitioners. They were landowners. They met Abernathy and went to the town hall. The council was already in session. Bartholomew Higgins was there, sitting at the head of the table. He was a big man, his belly straining a fine wool vest, a thick gold watch chain draped across it. He had a soft, fleshy face and small, greedy eyes. Sheriff Randall was there, leaning against the wall, his thumbs hooked in his belt. Mr. Abernathy, Higgins said, his voice a smooth, deep purr. We were just discussing the Coulter nuisance. I trust you're here to tell us your client has seen reason. My client is here to file, Abernathy said, his small voice shaking but firm. He laid the copies of the forgery proof on the table. This is incontrovertible proof that the Coulter title was never extinguished. The land belongs to Annabeth Coulter. Higgins looked at the papers and chuckled. A 30-year-old squabble. It means nothing. The land's been abandoned. The town will seize it for taxes. You can't, Abernathy said. Mrs. Coulter is here to pay all back taxes in full. He placed a small, heavy cloth bag on the table. It was the money from her locket. Higgins's smile faded. Randall pushed himself off the wall. And, Annabeth said, stepping forward, I am here to file this. She laid a new hand-drawn map on the table, showing the partition. I am partitioning the land, I am retaining the homestead, and I am deeding the eastern holding, with full water rights, to Mr. Levi Boone, as trustee for his community. The room went dead silent. Then Higgins began to laugh. It was a deep, rolling laugh that shook his belly. The other councilmen, sycophants all, joined in, tittering nervously. You're giving it away? Higgins finally wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. You're giving the best grays and the water rights to them? He gestured at Levi, his face full of contempt. To this pack of runaway whores, jailbirds and half-wits. I am giving it to my neighbors, Annabeth said, her voice cold. You are a sentimental old fool, Higgins said, his good humor vanishing. The council will not recognize this petition. It is absurd. You have to, Abernathy argued. It is her land. She can do with it as she sees fit. We will see about that, Higgins said. He looked at Randall. Sheriff Randall stepped forward. He pushed his hat back. He wasn't looking at Abernathy. He was looking at Annabeth. He walked until he was standing directly in front of her, so close she could smell the stale whiskey on his breath. You've been warned, Randall said, his voice a low, vicious snarl. You've been reminded what happens when you stir up trouble. You're not just an old woman anymore. You're a traitor to your own kind. You want to protect runaways and whores? He leaned in, his voice dropping so only she and Levi could hear. You'll be buried beside them. Annabeth did not flinch. She held his gaze until he looked away first, his bravado failing against her cold, steady fury. File the papers,
Mr. Abernathy, she said, turning her back on the sheriff. She and Levi walked out. They had lost. The law was a joke. The council would block the filing. Higgins and Randall would get what they wanted. They rode back in silence. The defeat was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. She felt the rage building. The same helpless rage she had felt in the barn. The same rage she had felt at the creek. When they reached the turnoff to the homestead, she pulled her horse to a stop. "Where are you going?" Levi asked. "To finish something," she said. She turned her horse not toward the homestead, but toward the small, wind-swept cemetery on the hill above Elkhorn Springs. Levi watched her go. Then, after a moment, he followed. She found the grave easily. It was a simple, rotting wooden cross, barely legible. Silas Coulter, 1840 to 1875. At rest. She stood there, the wind whipping her coat, and stared at the name. Her brother. The weak, whining boy who had destroyed her. He had died 12 years after he betrayed her, likely drinking himself into an early grave. And his lie had lived on. His lie had given Randall his power. His lie had led to Levi's beating. His lie was about to get them all killed. She thought of the men's laughter. She thought of Randall's threat. She thought of the 30 years she had spent in a cold, loveless life in the East. All of it, because of the coward buried 6 feet beneath her. "At rest," she said, the words a snarl. She leaned over and, with a lifetime of fury, she spat on the grave. It was a cold, final, venomous act. She felt no relief, no closure, only a vast, cold emptiness. Levi had stopped his horse at the gate. He watched her. He understood. He saw the poison being drawn. She turned from the grave, her face set like stone, and rode back to him. They rode home. That night, she called a meeting. The entire commune crowded into the longhouse. The room was cold, the air thick with fear. They had heard about the council meeting. They knew the end was coming. They looked at Annabeth, their faces pale. Levi stood in the back, by the door, his arms crossed over his aching ribs. He was a guardian, watching. "I know what you've heard," Annabeth began, her voice filling the quiet room. "You've heard that the council laughed at us. You've heard that Randall threatened us. You've heard that my plan has failed. And you're right." A murmur of despair went through the room. "You think I'm here to tell you to leave," she continued. "To save myself. And you have every reason to. You think I am the ghost who came back and brought this all down on you." She looked at Ruth, at Martha, at the pale faces of the young miners. "You need to know why I came back. You need to know who I am." She told them her full story, not the one she had confessed to Levi, but the public one. 30 years ago, this land was stolen from me. By my own brother. He had me beaten. He hired men. They beat me until I was half dead, all so he could take a piece of paper. I ran. I fled this land because I was 22, and I was broken, and I was a coward. I ran, and I let the lie stand. She looked at the faces. Row on row, they were listening. They were the broken. They understood. I came back to find what I lost. I came back for the dirt. I came back to find the ghost of that girl. But she's not here. There is only what is. There is you. And there is them. She pointed toward the town. Higgins, Randall. They are the same men who were here 30 years ago. They are the same men who beat me, who steal, who use the law as a club. They are the ones who did this to Levi. They are the ones who tore down your homes. And I am tired of running. She took a deep breath. My plan to partition the land failed. The law will not help us, so we will help ourselves. I am not fighting for a deed anymore. I am fighting for this home. I am not leaving. I am staying. Not just to fight. I am staying. To stay, if you will have me. The silence was profound. She had laid herself bare. She was not their landowner. She was one of them. Ruth was the first to move. She stood up,
her face tight. "They'll burn us out." "Let them try," Annabeth said. "They have guns." James, the miner, said. "So do we," Levi said, his voice quiet from the back of the room. Every head turned. He walked forward, coming to stand beside Annabeth. He was still bruised, but he was no longer broken. "We have been hiding. The hiding is over. If we run, we die. If we stay, we might live." He looked at Annabeth. "We stay." It was a declaration. The Commune erupted, not in cheers, but in a low, determined murmur. They were terrified, but they were together. Later that night, Annabeth stood outside the longhouse, looking up at the stars. The sky was a vast, cold spray of diamonds. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of pine. She felt exhausted, but for the first time in her life, she was not alone. She heard his footsteps on the gravel. Levi came to stand beside her. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the sky. "You were good in there," he said. "I told the truth. It was the right truth." She turned to him. His face was shadows, the bruises hidden by the night. "You stood beside me." "It's a good plan," he said. "That's not what I mean," she said, her voice quiet. "You stood beside me. You've agreed to this fight. You've agreed to let me stay, but you haven't asked me to." He was silent. He knew what she was asking. The man who said survival left no room for feelings. "This is going to be hard, Levi," she whispered, looking back at the stars. "They're going to come. They're going to try and kill us. And I'm tired of being alone. I need to know." She turned, her eyes finding his in the dark. "What would you do if I left again? If tomorrow I decided this was too much, that I was too old, and I just rode away?" He looked at her. He saw the woman who had spat on her brother's grave. He saw the woman who had faced down Randall. He saw the woman who had held his face in her hands and cleaned his wounds. He reached out, his hand finding hers in the cold. His fingers were rough, but his grip was steady. He thought of the cold, empty 30 years she had lived. He thought of his own empty years. "I'd follow," he said, his voice so quiet it was almost carried away by the wind. "I'd follow." The fire started 3 nights after the town council meeting. It was not an accident. It began near 2 in the morning, a flicker in the cold. Dry dark. The target was not the main house, full of people. It was the small, outer barn where they kept the milk cow and a few chickens. It was a message, a final, cruel warning. The first sound was the terrified, high-pitched braying of Annabeth's mule, which she had recovered from the town livery. Then came the frantic clucking of the chickens. Levi was the first one out, pulling on his boots, grabbing a rifle. Annabeth was right behind him, throwing a coat over the shirt she had slept in. The barn was already a tower of flame, bright orange against the black sky, sparks shooting up into the wind. "Water!" Levi yelled, his voice raw. "Get the buckets! Ruth, James, get the animals!" But it was too late. The old, dry timber went up like tinder. The heat was a physical blow, driving them back. The roof groaned. "The cow!" James yelled, running toward the door. "It's too late!" Levi shouted, grabbing him. "The roof is going!" Annabeth stood, her heart frozen, watching the structure sag. It was a nightmare. This was how they would do it, not in the light of day, but in the dark. "Where's Clara?" Martha's voice was a high, thin scream. "Oh God, where is Clara?" Annabeth's blood turned to ice. She spun, scanning the faces lit by the fire. The little girl was not there. She loved that new calf." Martha wept, pointing a shaking hand at the inferno. "She must have heard it. She must have gone in." Levi didn't wait. He didn't think. He wrapped his wet coat over his head and ran straight at the burning doorway. "Levi, no!" Annabeth screamed. He vanished into the smoke. For a terrible, agonizing 10 seconds,
There was only the roar of the fire. Then he staggered out, a dark shape, framed against the flames. He was carrying the small, limp form of the girl. He fell to his knees in the yard, his coat smoking, as the barn roof finally collapsed behind him in a shower of sparks. Annabeth was there, falling beside him, pulling the child from his arms. Clara's face was gray, covered in soot. Her eyes were closed.
"She's not breathing,"
Annabeth said, her voice numb with horror. Levi, his own lungs raw, pushed her hands away. He put his mouth over the girl's, forcing air into her small body. Once, twice, Clara's body convulsed. A small, weak, rasping cough came from her lips. Then another. Her eyes fluttered open, blind with terror, and she began to cry. A thin, smoky wail. Annabeth grabbed her, pressing the child's face into her shoulder, her own body shaking so hard she could barely hold her. She looked up at Levi. His hair was singed. His hands were burned. He was staring at the fire, not with anger, but with a terrifying, dead emptiness. He had almost lost her. He had almost lost another child. This was the line. For Annabeth, the final line had been crossed. This was not about land. This was not about deeds or water rights. This was about murder. She stood, Clara still clinging to her, and looked at the faces of the commune, lit by the dying flames of their barn. They were terrified. They were broken.
"Annabeth,"
Levi rasped, his voice full of gravel and smoke.
"It's over. We have to go."
She looked at him, the man who had said he would follow her. He was beaten. "No," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the cold air. "It is not over. You, Martha, clean her up. See to his hands. Ruth, find my saddle." "What are you doing?" Levi asked, staggering to his feet.
"It's Sunday,"
Annabeth said, her voice shaking with a cold, pure fury she had not known she possessed.
"I'm going to church."
She rode into Elkhorn Springs as the first bell was tolling for the morning service. She did not bother to change. She wore the clothes she had slept in, her face streaked with soot, her coat still smelling of smoke. She did not tie the horse. She let it stand, trembling, in the street. She walked up the steps of the white-clapboard church. The sound of a hymn, thin and reedy, came from within. She pushed the doors open. The singing stopped. The entire town was there, in their Sunday best. The women in hats, the men in clean shirts, and in the front pew, looking pious, sat Bartholomew Higgins. Beside him, in the back, leaning against the wall, was Sheriff Randall. The preacher, a young man with a pale face, stopped mid-verse. "Ma'am, this is a house of worship." Annabeth walked down the central aisle. Her boots were loud on the wooden floor. She stopped, standing in the center, between the pews, between the hypocrites. She looked at Higgins. She looked at Randall. Then she looked at the faces of the town, the shopkeepers, the wives, the mothers.
"You call this justice?"
she said, her voice low and raw, vibrating with rage.
"You sit here and you sing to God? You pray for rain and good harvests, while you send men in the night to burn out your neighbors?"
A gasp went through the crowd.
"Last night,"
Annabeth continued, her voice rising, "men came to my land. Your men, Mr. Higgins, your man, Sheriff Randall. They set fire to our barn." "This is slander," Higgins boomed, standing up, his face turning purple. "This woman is hysterical. She has no proof."
"I have the proof,"
Annabeth said. She held up her hands. They were raw, red, blistered from pulling hot timbers away.
"I have the proof on my skin. I have the proof in the lungs of a child who nearly died of smoke."
The church doors opened again. Levi Boone stood there. His face was still bruised from Randall's beating. His hands were wrapped in white bandages. He was flanked by Ruth and James. And behind him stood the entire commune. 20 souls, Martha, holding her baby. The two minors, their faces grim. The women who had fled the brothels, their heads held high. They filed in, silent as ghosts. They did not sit, they lined the back wall, a silent, standing jury of the dispossessed. They were soot-stained, weary, and terrified, but they were there. Levi walked down the aisle, just as Annabeth had. He stopped beside her. He carried a small, soot-covered object. It was a child's doll, half burned. He said nothing. He just held it up for the preacher to see. The town was silent. The air was thick with shame. The women in the Pilsner hats could not look away. They saw Martha's baby. They saw the burns on Levi's hands. They saw the burned doll. "This," Annabeth said, her voice breaking with the truth of it, "is the law in Elkhorn Springs. This is the justice of Bartholomew Higgins. And this is the protection of Sheriff Randall." She looked at the faces, one by one. "And you are all guilty. You've been quiet. You've looked away. You've let this happen because it was easier. You let him," she pointed at Higgins. "And him," she pointed at Randall. "Do your dirty work. Well, look at it. Look at what you've allowed." A woman in the third pew, the mercantile owner's wife, began to weep. Higgins saw the tide turning. He saw the shame. "This is nonsense. These people are squatters. They're criminals." "They are widows." Levi's voice cut through, deep and resonant. "They are orphans. They are men who were wronged. They are people, just people. And all we asked was to be left alone." "Randall," Higgins commanded, his voice sharp with panic. "Do your job. Arrest these people. They are disrupting the peace." Sheriff Randall had been watching, his face pale, his hand on his gun. He was trapped. He looked at Higgins, then at the angry, ashamed faces of the townsfolk. He made his choice. He pulled his pistol. "You're done," he snarled, pointing the gun not at Levi, but at Annabeth. You're the one. You're the one who started this." Time stopped. Annabeth looked down the barrel of the gun. She was not afraid. She was just tired. Levi stepped in front of her. A simple, immediate act. He shielded her with his body. "No." Randall's finger tightened. "I'll shoot you both." "No," Annabeth said. She stepped out from behind Levi to stand beside him. They stood shoulder to shoulder. A wall. United. "Sheriff." The voice was quiet, but firm. It came from the side. It was the young deputy, the one who had served the papers. His face was white. His hand was resting on the butt of his own gun. "Sheriff Randall, put the gun down." The deputy said, "You stay out of this, boy." Randall spat. "No, sir." The deputy took a step forward. "It's Sunday. There's women here. There's children. You're not going to do this. Not in front of the whole town. Put it down." Randall looked from the deputy, to Levi, to Annabeth. He looked at the faces of the town. He saw no support. He saw only shame and disgust. He was alone. With a curse that echoed in the holy room, he slowly lowered the pistol. He had lost. Words spread faster than a prairie fire. The story of the church, of the standoff, of the burned doll. It traveled to the neighboring counties. It reached the territorial capital. Bartholomew Higgins, it turned out, had enemies. The man who owned the bank in Cheyenne had been waiting for Higgins to overplay his hand. The town council of Elkhorn Springs held an emergency meeting. Higgins was not present. Sheriff Randall was. He was asked to turn in his badge. He did, and was on a train heading east by nightfall. A week later, the council voted. Mr. Abernathy presented the partition papers again. This time, they did not laugh. The vote was unanimous. The land was legally divided. The Coulter homestead belonged to Annabeth. The Eastern Ridge and water rights belonged to the Commune, under the trusteeship of Levi Boone. There were new restrictions. The Commune had to file a monthly report. They were not allowed to expand beyond their current numbers without council approval. It was not a perfect victory. It was a truce. But it was legal. It was real. The hard winter came, blanketing the high desert in snow. The world went quiet. The commune, safe for the first time, rebuilt the barn. They huddled in the longhouse, sharing stories, surviving. Annabeth stayed in Levi's small room. It was now their room. They did not speak of the future. They did not speak of love. They did not need to. They woke each morning in the cold dark. They drank coffee by the stove. He would go out to check the animal traps. She would start the bread. They moved around each other in a quiet, practiced rhythm. They had earned this. They had survived. When the spring thaw came, Annabeth found the patch of earth behind the house where her mother's garden had been. The soil was hard, but good. She took a spade and began to turn it. Her hands, which had once been soft from her life in the East, were now hard and calloused. She worked the dirt, planting the seeds she had bought in town, seeds for beans and squash and corn. She was planting roots. One afternoon, she was on her knees, pulling weeds, when a shadow fell over her. It was Levi. He was carrying tools. He didn't speak. He just walked to the end of the small back porch, which was little more than a few rotting planks. He began to tear the old wood up. She watched him. He worked with a steady, quiet purpose. He laid new foundations. He began to frame a proper porch, a wide one, a porch big enough for 2 chairs. He was building their future, one hammer stroke at a time. A few days later, Clara, who now followed Annabeth everywhere, sat on the steps watching her. Annabeth was mending one of the girl's dresses, her fingers working the needle and thread. "Your stitches are crooked," Clara observed, her head tilted. "They'll hold," Annabeth said, biting the thread. She held the dress out. "There." Clara took it, her small face serious. "Thank you, Ma." Annabeth's hands froze in her lap. The word hung in the warm spring air. Ma, the name of the daughter she had lost, the name she never thought she would hear. Clara, oblivious, just put the dress on and ran off to find the cat. Annabeth put her hand to her mouth, and a quiet, slow smile spread across her face. It stuck. The land healed. The summer was warm, and the garden grew. One bright morning in late August, Levi stood on the new porch, a cup of coffee in his hand. He watched Annabeth. She was 53 years old, lean and strong, her hair more gray than brown. She was saddling the sorrel mare. She finished and swung up into the saddle with the easy grace of the girl she had once been. She was riding out to mend the fence wire on the north pasture. She kicked the horse into a walk, then stopped at the ridge. She turned in the saddle. She looked back at him, at the house, at the life they had built from ashes. Annabeth Coulter smiled. It was not the tight, pained grimace he had first seen. It was a real smile, full of warmth and sun. It lit her whole face. She raised a hand, a small wave, then turned the horse and rode out against the big blue Wyoming sky. Levi watched her go. He took a sip of his coffee. He thought about the woman who had come back for revenge, for land, for a deed. He thought about the woman who had stayed, who had fought, who had healed. He thought to himself, she didn't come back for the land, she came back for us. Thank you for listening to this story. We're so glad you joined us for this tale from the high desert. We'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to From Wild West so you never miss a new chapter from this untamed country. And finally, we truly value your thoughts. Share your thoughts in English and tell us what this story meant to you. We'll see you next time.